This week on the Wheelhouse. Power generation, Pura, poking the bear. It's environmental policy in Connecticut. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. 1 year ago during Earth Week, state officials fussed over when the state would adopt California Class Zero carbon emission standards. Fast forward to today, there's a different president in the White House with different ideas about what makes a greener future. And at the local level, the fight is over who gets to lead a state public utilities regulator. High energy costs may prevent Connecticut from achieving its long-term climate goals and push the state towards less clean means of power generation, at least for the next few years. Tell us more about where the state is now on environmental initiatives. Michaela Savitt joins us. Michaela is Connecticut Public State Government Reporter. Good morning, Michaela.
Good morning, Frankie.
So good to see you this morning. I'm going to open up the phone lines in a second, but before I do, there's a lot of anxiety around the climate right now. We just talked about the state having to essentially change its outlook, and I'm sure many states are right now, about the environment. Is there anywhere that anybody could go if they need to not necessarily ease their anxiety, but at least a place where they can go and they could learn more about what they could do maybe for the environment, or to maybe just kind of, chill out a little bit over what's happening with this news?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right, Frankie. Climate anxiety is up. A lot of the surveys over the years and latest surveys are showing that a lot of people, especially young people, are feeling a lot of sense of loss of control or hopelessness when it comes to the climate crisis. To answer your question more broadly, we can talk to each other about what we can do to, help the planet. But, looking for solutions in the community is great. There's a lot of things happening in every town and city. I was thinking about this, this week, and I found a website that's called unthinkable.earth. And, they brand themselves as, they help provide resources. It's just like a hub to accelerate coping and healing and change making through climate psychology. We talk a lot about the policy when it comes to climate change here on the show, and the impacts of climate change on our health and well-being, and, our minds are all part of that. So, just wanted to put that out there before we talk about everything that's going on.
And the host happens to be wearing a purple suit and orange turtleneck, and about an issue that is very serious. But it's good that we start that out in this show so that people know that there is a place that they can go, and people know that we have real people working here at Connecticut Public, including Michaela Savitt. Thank you for sharing that wonderful information with us. I want to open up the phone lines to folks. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. We're taking your calls regarding anxiety about climate change. Maybe there's folks out there who are excited about fossil fuels and using more gas and this drill mentality. Maybe you are out there. I don't know. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. But folks, we are here to answer your questions and talk about maybe some of the things you're doing to save the earth, as it were. This legislative session, lawmakers in Connecticut hoping to move the needle on a key part of tackling the climate crisis, resiliency. And that's why I'm excited to talk to Michaela today. You spoke with the House Chair of the Environment Committee. What did he tell you about the state's plan to address our climate?
Yeah, well, like you said, solutions, big and small, are needed. So when we look at this on, the state policy level, there are two bills which are, as the House Chair, John Michael Parker was saying, work really nicely together in his view to tackle the side of addressing energy and environment. So that is, reviving House Bill 5004 from last year, which, just as a reminder, just more tackling the reducing emissions part of the issue here in Connecticut, and working alongside this other piece, which is a Senate Bill 9, which is more about, the long-term plans, more of the planning, how municipalities can work on conservation development, think about floodplains, and vulnerability assessments. We're talking about helping towns and cities, pinpoint which areas may be at more at risk of climate hazards, and working on that mitigation planning for rising sea levels along the shoreline. So, working together on, and you're going to talk about this more, I know, later on, but working on the renewable energy side in the House bill, and updating targets for the state and its agencies to meet in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then, with the Senate bill, really working on that planning side and planting seeds for making sure that residents and their homes are ready for what's to come.
Why now? And is there urgency?
Yeah. Why now? There's a couple of answers to that.
But specifically, are they? Let me get closer. Is it because they're addressing potential cuts with the government? Is it because of the mentality we talked about, drill baby drill? That's kind of the mentality that they have in the White House right now, and they've even said that. Is it because of that, or is it because the state has shied away from EV mandates and zero carbon emission legislation total? So what would you say is it closer to?
Let me start with the the concerns on the federal level, and I'm not gonna get into all of it because there's so much still in flux. But overarching, these bills were on the minds of our local lawmakers and Governor Lamont even before the Trump administration started making these deep cuts to federal programs and offices like the Environmental Protection Agency and FEMA, which are so critical to local response to disasters, but also in the work of all the other monitoring and of our environment. When we look to the August flooding in the Naugatuck Valley, for example, it's hundreds of millions of dollars in damage, and we had a federal disaster declaration approved, and we needed the EPA's help for that technical assistance, and we needed FEMA's help as well. So a lot of officials and advocates feel it's important for the state to scale up, these long-term plans to ensure that we're ready to, hate to say this, weather the storm.
And I would imagine that's why we're seeing some folks. I think about Oxford. I think about the roadways. And I spoke to the commissioner of the Department of Transportation shortly after that, and they were talking about those resiliency efforts where you're just simply, putting tar or whatever you can, or trying to stand up those curbs on the side of the road. And that was a huge issue down in Oxford at the time. So that's one of the things you're talking about that'll be in 5004, whatever it is in that bill.
It'll be in the Senate bill, but I know things get confusing when it comes to policy, and sometimes things just get rolled into one bill. But in 5004, this House bill, more looking at making sure our energy sector is resilient to impacts of climate change, and being able to produce more energy, and getting our greenhouse gas emissions down. We're not meeting our state targets that were set out a couple years ago. And I do want to speak to the other point. There has been some advocates feel like there's been a lag in action on the state's part when it comes to legislation. And we'll talk a little bit later in the segment about some of the projects the state has invested in, but just laying it out. And in January, NOAA said that 2024 was the globe's hottest year since records started being kept in the 1800s. And, I could list off all the many different ways climate change touches our lives, from the food in our fridge to public health to, I don't know.
We're right now we're downwind from pollutants emanating from other states like Ohio. And last year, it's famously, I guess not infamously, Attorney General William Tong put it this way: Connecticut sits at the end of our nation's tailpipe. What does that mean for our health?
Well, we can blame it on the wind for that. Just bringing over pollution from the Midwest, where there is, more pollution, and we're talking about ground level ozone, fine particulate matter. In layman's terms, these are types of pollution that can cause really serious health issues, especially impacting our, people's respiratory and cardiovascular health. And, extreme heat days, which we're seeing more and more of, the long-term data showing, we're seeing more, the globe is getting hotter. We can't deny that our climate is changing. These extreme heat days that are also happening in Connecticut make the impacts of pollution on air quality worse.
Had we made strides in our air quality and our emission standards in recent years? Has the local government, has federal government in recent years made strides on air quality initiatives?
I don't think you and I were alive when the Clean Air Act was first enforced in 1970.
Yeah.
But we've seen our air quality dramatically improve, especially in cities, thanks to that federal Clean Air Act. It was now we're seeing dozens of bedrock rules just being challenged by left and right by the new administration. Some of these other laws that have benefited our state is the Good Neighbor Rule, which was adopted in 2023 to protect downwind states like Connecticut. We've also got the endangerment finding, which is almost 2 decades old, which declared greenhouse gases are warming up and harming the planet and requires that the EPA limit them. So those are just a handful of some of these really bedrock rules that are important. And, it's coming at a time of a lot of upheaval. Just yesterday, I read that the EPA began laying off hundreds of its environmental justice staff.
I want to underscore this point. It's a really quick one, but you're saying that people in the cities feel this the most, the air quality concerns. So in Connecticut, we're talking about Hartford, Bridgeport, I would imagine, New Haven as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look at. I don't know the most recent studies, but when we look at another thing that came out yesterday was the American Lung Association's annual report card showing us, pollution exposure is, first of all, worse in the nation than it was last year. But yeah, we are seeing more significant levels of high ground level ozone in Fairfield County, especially, but also seeing it in, this ozone impacts in New Haven, Middlesex, and New London counties. But coming back to your point about cities,
that's a big concentration of people, though, in Fairfield County. So that is rather important. That
yes. And coming back, we have to look back. We always have to look back to history when it comes to disparities. And there's a huge amount of research and data that shows that, historic policies that are like a century old, such as redlining, which is residential segregation, plus the placement of highways, play a huge role in the equity of air quality. And so, predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, we're seeing in studies for a long time now, are seeing worse air quality. And this is not just in Connecticut. It's all over the U.S.
It's not, but there's been a big effort, particularly locally here in Hartford, to have more trees and focus on the environmental racism aspect where you can try to improve your air quality as best as you can because the reality is it's hot in America. It's hot in Connecticut in the summer. It's really hot in the cities, 10 to 15 degrees, sometimes
Yeah.
more. So important to look at that. Just last week, you reported that the state is funding more efforts to divert food scraps. And I'm heartened by this because I see a lot more of green compost bags out there. I know I use it. I need to focus on the amount of food that we waste every week as I'm
Mm.
seeing how many green compost bags I'm using, and it just helps me see that. And I'm seeing them in dumpsters and things like that. At least that schools are starting to divert their food scraps. So, how's the state getting food out of our waste stream, and why are lawmakers acting now?
First of all, yes, absolutely. Just one of the big climate solutions that scientists recommend is just reducing the amount of food we're throwing out in general, because there's so many emissions that go into the process of making food, especially things like uh, with beef, which is a huge, creates a lot of emissions in that process. But just to briefly go over this, it's one of the bright spots, in the state, working on a solution. So we in the last 5 years, the state's been funding grants for pilot programs, for ways for folks to dispose of their food scraps and organic matter. And they found that there was over 2.5 million pounds of food diverted from these 15 pilot programs. And of those 15, 6 were made permanent by the cities. So they've continued to fund the grants that cities and towns compete for or can apply for, and they just awarded a bunch more last month. New Haven's one of them. That'll be interesting. It's kind of the biggest city that's going to be trying it out for the first time. But the purpose is twofold, like you were saying. It's to make sure there's less food going into the waste stream because food in landfills rotting creates methane, a super potent greenhouse gas, I think 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide, heating up our atmosphere even more. Part 2, and we could do a whole show about this, is
And
that
we will in the future.
we are in a solid waste crisis in the state, with the closure of a waste to energy incinerator in 2022 in Hartford.
Yes, Mira.
Mira closing, that was big in our headlines. That added a lot to our, ongoing problem of just a lack of real estate of where to put our trash. But 40% of our garbage is shipped out of states to like Pennsylvania and Ohio. And, lawmakers are working
They're
on
concerned
that.
about
And there
the
is a
bill.
bill working on that. House Environment Chair Rhett Parker said, this bill that's currently in process, wants to work on that, fund more pilots for the future, work on more solutions. But no single bill is going to solve the waste crisis.
We can talk about this all day. I wish we could, but unfortunately, we're out of time. You did a tremendous job today, Michaela, and thank you for your reporting on this. And thank you for putting your heart into your reporting. We appreciate it very much.
Well, it's our planet. We only get one.
We only get one. We only get one planet. You've been listening to Michaela Savitt, state government reporter for Connecticut Public. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Frankie.
This is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're going to take a short break. We just talked about climate resiliency efforts. What are you all doing to protect the planet this Earth Day, this Earth Week? Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Back with more Wheelhouse after this break. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Apparently, lawmakers in Connecticut can't agree on exactly why energy bills are so high, among the highest in the nation. There are many reasons why our energy bills are high. Costly reliance on out-of-state natural gas, fluctuating energy markets, and a controversial power purchase agreement with the Millstone nuclear power plant in Waterford. That deal says utilities have to buy a portion of their power from that nuclear plant, which doesn't always save ratepayers money when natural gas prices are cheaper. But not all lawmakers want to talk about purchasing agreements. Now we're paying for power, how we're paying for power. They want to talk about who's got the power. Here with more on the argument over who should lead a state regulatory authority is Jacqueline Rabe Thomas. Good morning, Jackie. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Jackie's an investigative reporter with Hearst Connecticut Media. Also with us, someone who's cultivated data to inform lawmakers about energy policy, Charles Venator Santiago, associate professor with a joint appointment in the Department of Political Science and El Instituto at University of Connecticut. Good morning, Charles.
Hi again, Frankie.
Thank you so much for coming here, and thank you for bringing on a colleague of yours here, Vladimir Gupan, a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science at UConn. How you doing, Vladimir?
Good. Thank you for having me, too.
Thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it, folks. You got questions. 888-720-9677. You're asking, why are my energy bills so high? You're also asking, why are they talking about Pura all the time? What does that mean? Well, listen for the next few minutes. Hopefully we'll help you out with that. You're following the controversial confirmation process for chairperson of Connecticut's Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. First of all, what is Pura and who's in charge of Pura?
Sure. So Pura is essentially the entity that helps regulate prices of what shows up on your, largely what shows up on your bills that you're receiving each month, and is tasked with making sure the requests that are coming in the rate requests, that they are reasonable, that different portions are needed of what's being asked to do capital investments and other types of explanations that are being given. And so there's been a lot of controversy over some of their decisions recently, but they're essentially the ones that sort of are the last best stop before the bill gets to you.
They're trying to make sure that there's not some crazy rate hike, basically.
Exactly. They make the math and make sure that there's only certain parts of a bill that are allowed to have profits. And so the capital investments is the main source of capital of utilities making earnings and return on their investment. And so there's an incentive to sort of build out in Connecticut for things. And so Pura is tasked with making sure that the infrastructure that they're building out is appropriate.
Why would some lawmakers then, if Pura's trying to make sure that the bills aren't sky high and they don't go out of control, why would some lawmakers look to Pura? Why would they look at someone named Marissa Gillette as somebody who might be responsible for the bills going the other way, I guess skyrocketing? Why would they look at them?
Sure. So Pura has historically been a 3-person panel, and there is been a push to expand that to 5 members. And essentially, if you ask Governor Ned Lamont, in previous months, he would say, I don't really understand what moving from 3 to 5 commissioners would do to help draw down costs. If on the other side of the equation, you have people who say you need more debate about what's going on, and having that sort of authority rest with one person isn't necessarily good governing. And so, the more minds making decisions, the better. But having this idea of sort of ruling by consensus, sometimes things need to be, not a little bit weakened to get across the finish line to reach consensus or to get that majority vote, versus one person can really make some bold decisions that are needed.
And so this idea of the administration of PURA has had a lot of focus for some reason. And I'm just not sure how much that actually impacts costs for ratepayers.
And I know that Charles and Vladimir will have some more on why you might want to go from 3 to 5 in a moment. But we're talking about the confirmation of Marissa Gillette and having a second term here, and it sounds like that's already pretty much done. Marissa Gillette is ready to go, but they were making a stink over her confirmation.
Yeah, she won final approval. All my weeks merge. I think it was last week in the Senate. And so
we were both taking care of our kids on spring break and trying to work. So
yes, multitasking at its best. So she was approved when final approval last week. The next question is whether they expand to the 5. There was a deal that was made to try to get up to 5 to essentially firm up her approval. There's been some controversy about whether or not that will move forward, though.
That's Gillette, but that doesn't even do it for maybe the most controversial seat on this board. This is where we start talking about John Fonfara, a state senator seeking a PURA appointment. Who is he and why is he so controversial?
So Senator Fonfara is a longtime senator from Hartford. Was previously the Energy Committee chairman for years. I think it was 8 years. And he also is now the chairman of the powerful Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, which is your tax writing committee. And he essentially has a lot of history with energy. He ran a small supply company, as well as has done tried to do some innovative things in the energy market, and has kind of pushed boundaries. I discovered that he has been fined by PURA for when he was closing his company, before the company officially closed, that PURA actually had fined him for not paying a $50,000 fee that many utilities suppliers were fined to sort of redevelop the bill that consumers receive. And so he just never paid it. He insists that he was never given the opportunity to appeal it. I received records that show that his business partners did receive notice, and that they just didn't avail themselves of the appeals process to that $58,000 fee. And so it ballooned, and now it's at $1.1 million.
$1.1 million. Okay, before we get more into that, I want to bring in UConn and El Instituto's Charles Venator Santiago. Why might it be beneficial to have commissioners added to the PURA board to go from 3 to 5?
Well, you have multiple areas that you work with. So it would be great to have a specific commissioner that could work in multiple areas like water, electricity, telecommunications. And then you can have a broader base for a consensus discussion.
With Fonfara being a Lamont pick, Jackie, the concern over Fonfara's business dealings, the fact that he's already got a job as senator and the Finance Revenue Bond Committee appointment as well. Has it become too much for lawmakers to get behind, or is this something that's eventually going to go through? Do we know anything?
So I just want to be clear, it's not Lamont's pick. He agreed to pick him.
Sorry, he agreed to pick him. Yes, that's
so
thank you for that clarification.
The legislators are the ones who put him forward, and so it's to be determined what happens with the $1.1 million outstanding fee. There's a clear conflict of him sitting on a board that he has a huge outstanding fine from. I think most would agree. How that gets resolved, there's really no precedent for this, of what happens when there's this huge outstanding fee and sort of settling that. His lawyers sent the governor a letter. Again, time is a thief. Like 3 weeks ago, I think it was, and asked for an investigation into how those fines ballooned so much. I'll spare you all the specific details, but essentially debating whether he should have ever been fined to begin with, and how it escalated so quickly, and who approved those. And so he essentially is debating that and asking the governor's office to sort of scrap the fees or look into whether they were ever appropriate. The governor doesn't seem super interested in doing that. He's really been backing his commissioner and his commission so far, but he's also sort of just hoping that I think the controversy goes away surrounding it. So
big controversy surrounding it. Jackie said that it doesn't necessarily have much to do with our energy costs. When we were talking about Marissa Gillette's pick and the fight over it, the complaint that many people have, Charles, is that we're talking about not really the issues, that the fight won't necessarily result in a resolution everybody wants, which is cheaper electric bills. But to achieve just that, you and your colleagues at El Instituto have made some policy recommendations. I think there may be 7 in total. There was 5, 7, 10. What is it? How many?
So we originally made about 42. And since then, in our last meeting with Representative Minnie Gonzalez, we settled on 2 recommendations. One in wholesale markets.
Now you're all the way down to 2. Okay.
Yes. Well, 2 with multiple
Yes.
suggestions. And the RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard. But I'll pass it to Volodymyr. He might want to say.
Yeah, so we have a lot of recommendations. 2 of the ones that we are focusing on are related to some of the renewable energy policy, and some of them are related to more of the wholesale energy side. In terms of pure commissioners, we actually did we did look into number of commissioners and how numbers correlate with prices. And when I'm saying it's correlating, is because I don't know what causes it. But the correlation is very strong in states, deregulated states, where 5-member commissioners are, the prices are generally lower. And the difference is the average for deregulated states with 3 commissioners is about 19 cents per kilowatt hour. And for those with 5 is 14 cents. So that's a correlation that's there. Connecticut is obviously outlier for the data that we were looking at. That was November, I believe, 2024. Connecticut was 24 cents. So it was way out of that those averages. But that's a correlation that is in the data in terms of number of commissioners.
When we're talking about 19 cents per kilowatt hour, that's where people generally die in these discussions when we're super weedy and they kind of lose it. But it's important because this is how people are charged. So when you go from 19 to 14, how much, is there any way we can quantify what that might look like on somebody's bill? How much of average savings that is?
It is exactly how it looks between 19 and 14. Those 3 cents would so those 3 cents are roughly what it would be. 20% difference, something around that. So that's going to be the same because
save about 20% on it. That's a good way to look
the
at
average household in Connecticut uses about 700 kilowatt hours per month. So that is it's quite easy to calculate those savings.
Sure.
So I should mention that there's 2 things that are going to naturally happen to draw down people's costs in the coming months that could help provide more immediate relief. The sort of the longer term policy goals of changing things is a really important discussion. But Millstone on the public benefits cost, Millstone is a huge driver of those costs, and there was a vote to have those costs be incurred by ratepayers over 10 months, and so that's supposed to be coming off relatively soon, as well as just this morning. There was a vote by PURA to decrease some of the additional costs because of some unrelated things to Millstone, but on the public benefits charge that would reduce Eversource bills by $13 a month and UI by $3 a month. And so there's some things that are happening that are able to sort of be more immediately done at the PURA board to draw down the costs.
Could you guys help us? We only have a couple of minutes left. Could you guys help us with the wholesale end of your recommendations? And then what was the other one there? The renewable, yeah. Go ahead, just in a couple of minutes,
Yeah, so on renewable portfolio standard, the policy is great in principle. We all want clean water, clean air, and all of that. But when we're looking at the emissions data for last 2 decades, really, we see that emissions were reducing since 2009. Actually, before 2009, but after 2009, they were also reducing, and then they started increasing. And they keep increasing. The early data for 2024 also shows that they're increasing. We are producing more electricity. However, we're supposed to get about 38% in 2025, what is called clean renewable energy per renewable portfolio standard. So how is it happens that we are getting higher emissions? The answer is actually quite easy, because renewable portfolio standard only tells us that we need to have certification for the energy to be clean. It doesn't mean that the energy has to be clean. It doesn't mean that natural gas power plants functioning in a state has to produce less. Actually, they have every incentive to produce more, because some states, one of our neighbors, Massachusetts, has a huge energy deficit of about 60%. They have every incentive to produce more electricity to Connecticut to sell it north.
So you're saying we're going to incentivize natural gas producers and nuclear power producers basically to produce more?
Well, the market
Electricity,
incentivizes.
yeah. Okay, the market will
But
incentivize it.
the policy adds an incentive, because per renewable portfolio standard, every ratepayer has to receive 38% of clean energy. And where would that clean energy come if the whole New England region only produces 8% out of total energy mix? Connecticut itself is around 5 to 7% by different estimates. So where does that energy comes, really? Can we believe that if clean energy produced in Georgia or in California, because some certificates come from those states, can it get to Connecticut being clean?
Yeah.
Does it really clean our air? I'm not so sure. I'm being very skeptical about that. In terms of wholesale prices, when we're talking about millstone price of electricity, or it is said by the 2018 agreement in 49.99, I think, honestly, it's a great price, because if you look at the Eversource FERC filings that they have to file every year to federal government in terms of how much we're paying for electricity, the standard service rate is about $200. How is it possible that we are supposed to get that $49.99 electricity, but the average is $200? At the same time, for 2023, the price on New England wholesale market, ISO New England, is $70. So millstone price in 2023 was lower than wholesale, yet we're still paying $200 per megawatt hour paid in 2023 for standard
So the
service.
bottom line here is that you guys were saying that perhaps we try to get out of ISO New England, perhaps we negotiate with New York, perhaps we create our own regional initiative.
Perhaps,
Go ahead.
perhaps that, or perhaps maybe we could the state can get to the wholesale market and maybe start buying electricity from its own natural gas power plants that are in the state, and compete with wholesalers that charge sometimes 170% more for the electricity compared to the wholesale price.
Very quickly, because we got to go. You said this to lawmakers. You made some of these policy recommendations. What'd they say to you?
Nothing, not yet.
Not yet.
There hasn't been a response yet. Some lawmakers are really excited, Representative Minnie Gonzalez in the Puerto Rican Latino Caucus, because it's an opportunity to reduce prices and save money for the state, given the potential crisis.
Oh my God, I wish we had all day to talk about this. We're running out of time. We have to get to our final segment. What a tremendous discussion that we had. Very helpful in terms of illuminating where we could go on this, and particularly what may not necessarily be the issue and what we have to move away from, which is some of this Pura drama that we're having. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're going to see what happens at the end of the session, and we'll follow it until the end of June. Jackie Rabe Thomas, she is an investigative reporter with Hearst Connecticut Media. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Charles Venator Santiago with El Instituto in Yukon. Thank you for coming on the show.
Always.
And Vladimir, it was so nice to meet you. Thank you so much. Vladimir Gupan,
Thank
a
you for having me.
PhD candidate at UConn. Thank you so much. More to come on the show, including maybe the moment you all have been waiting for, bear time. We're going to get into the habituation situation in Connecticut, the hunt. Plus, we'll talk about those viral bear videos you've all been watching that are maybe scaring you. When we come back, environmental policy as it relates to Ursus americanus, the black bear. Are you aware? Are you bear aware Have you heeded Deep's recommendation to bring those bird feeders in? Join the conversation. 888-720-9677. 888-720-9677. Back with more Wheelhouse after this. You can't talk about bears without hearing this concept. Why?
Yeah, so habituation basically refers to the idea that certain bears, as they encroach into more human populated areas, they might get fed either intentionally or unintentionally. They find sources of trash. In the most extreme cases, we've even seen them breaking into people's homes and into their fridges to find food. And, basically, it's just a fancy term for if a bear finds food and it's easy for it to get at that food, it's going to go back. And that's going to bring it increasingly into contact with people.
You're seeing a video of it right there in a kitchen. Oh, and also pulling out the refrigerator. I've done play-by-play for years, folks. Never been able to do play-by-play for something like this. This is exciting. That's the American black bear right there pulling out of somebody's, I'm going to say that's a General Electric fridge or something like that. Oh, and then climbing out the window. That is a very smart bear. What's Deep's position, their policy position on bears?
So Deep has supported the idea of a managed bear hunt in recent years. They've asked lawmakers to put forward legislation that would allow them to set up essentially what would be a lottery-based hunt, so people could put in for a license, and there'd be able to go out into the woods in certain areas and hunt bears. That has prompted strong pushback from conservation groups and members of the environmental community, and so far we've not seen that go forward. But we've also seen Deep push for things. They have a Bear Aware campaign encouraging people to basically, lock your doors, keep trash out of areas where bears can easily get to it. Don't put your trash out several days before trash day, especially if you live in an area with high concentrations of bears. And, in the late summer and fall months when the bears are fattening up to go into the winter in their hibernation period, encouraging people to take down bird feeders and other sources of food that might serve
You're
as
saying
attractant
that
to
in the
bear.
fall they would do that.
Yeah, I believe the regulations currently last basically from summer to fall when bears are most active.
The idea of a bear hunt, as you just mentioned, was floated through the legislature. We're talking about a managed bear hunt, but it's not necessarily going to look like what we were talking about with people going into the woods. It may be, it might have even been stripped out of bill language. Help us understand where we're at on that. Are we talking about maybe even only protecting farmers? What are we talking about in terms of any kind of bear hunt?
So the proposals that were put forward in the original form, both this year and in 2023, did ask for a managed bear hunt that would take place primarily in the Litchfield Hills in the northwest corner of the state where the population is densest. Due to the opposition, that kind of pure anyone can apply for a license, go for a hunt if they are approved, that was stripped out of the bill, and that's not going to be moving forward at this point. What Deep was able to get lawmakers to do in 2023 as kind of a compromise is if you are a farmer and you can prove that you've suffered crop or livestock damage as a result of bears encroaching onto your property, you can apply for a permit from Deep to shoot and kill that bear to defend your own property. The bill also allows people to kill bears in self-defense in certain situations if they feel that their lives or the lives of their pets were put in danger. And we have seen they're rare, but we have seen several instances of actual bear attacks on humans in the last couple of years.
So we know now that the limited bear hunt won't get passed. What stands is what we have from 2023, and essentially you can't kill the bear. You have to prove. You can only kill a bear in self-defense, but you would have to get a permit first.
Well, you would have to
do that.
You could if you're a farmer who's worried that the bear is damaging your crops or livestock, that would require a permit. If it's in self-defense, that is allowed. You would just have to make that argument afterwards.
What's the reaction been from people that were supportive of this when the bill was stripped out?
People supportive of a hunt, they've been disappointed.
Yeah.
And we
and lawmakers too. Sorry.
And lawmakers who are supportive of those hunters have also been disappointed. And one of the things that we've heard from them, and frankly from Deep, is that as the population expands and is coming into increasing contact with people, the likelihood of someone getting hurt is increasing. And, advocates or opponents of a hunt argue that we need to take more stringent measures that are non-lethal to try to discourage contact between bears.
So Deep even supports the managed bear hunt. So that's kind of the nuance in this conversation is it seems like there's a wide support for a managed bear hunt. Won't happen in 2025. Just as we finish out the show here, we want to know, I think you gave us some tips, but there was the Bear Aware campaign. Any other thoughts for folks to try to be more bear aware here? Maybe as you're hiking, or maybe as you're planning out where your garbage goes in the street. Tell us some more bear aware kind of ideas.
Yeah. So you mentioned the garbage, not putting out the garbage several days, keeping it in your garage or somewhere where a bear can't get to it until it's actually trash day. If you're going out into the woods, bring a whistle or some type of device that could kind of, scare off a bear. The black bears that we have in Connecticut are not grizzlies, but it's important to keep yourself safe. And if you do see a bear in the woods, it's probably the best idea to call Deep, especially if that's a bear that's close to, areas where people live in homes.
John, we had a lot of fun here talking about bears. We even got to do a little play-by-play there. Very serious issue, though. People want to be bear aware, obviously, whether on their hike or hanging out in the backyard. I appreciate the fact that you were able to go through this with us. John Moritz, a reporter with the Connecticut Mirror. Thank you so much for coming on the Wheelhouse.
Thank you for having me.
So great to have you on the show. Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn. It was edited by Robin Doyen-Aiken. You can't do a show about the environment without some great support in our rundown from Patrick Scahill. Thank you so much. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Thank you so much to Meg Fitzgerald and the rest of the team here, including operations, Megan Boone and Joe Koss. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much to Brad O'Connor. Thank you to our visuals team, including Julianne Veracci and Sam Hockaday. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you so much for listening.
Look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. I mean the bare necessities. That's why a bear can rest at ease with just the bare necessities of life. Yeah, with just the bare necessities of life.
Yeah, man!